She was born in a small, humble house in the heart of America, the third of 3 sisters. The family wasn't rich, but they had enough to live a comfortable life. Her parents worked hard, and though they were not wealthy, they were proud of their simple, yet fulfilling lifestyle. Growing up, she admired her mother's strength and resilience. She often saw her mother balance everything: running the household, supporting her father's dreams, and ensuring the girls grew up with respect for their heritage. Life was simple and she was surrounded by love. However, there was always this underlying pressure, the expectation to follow the rules, to marry well, and to make her parents proud. But she was different. She had dreams of her own, dreams that were not confined by the traditional roles that many of her peers accepted so easily. She was determined to find her own path, regardless of the sacrifices. When she was in her early 20s, she met him, someone who seemed to understand her, someone who spoke of adventure and breaking free from societal norms. They were young and in love, and though their families didn't approve of their relationship, they decided to marry in secret. The tension between her and her parents grew, as they could not accept her decision to marry against their will. She was heartbroken, but she believed in her choice. She left her family and started a new life with the man she loved. First, it seemed like everything was going to be fine. The 2 of them built a life together, and soon they were blessed with their first child, a son. Over time, 2 more sons followed. She felt happiness in her heart, even though her life was far from perfect. But soon the cracks started to show. Her husband's nature changed. What seemed like the man of her dreams became a stranger. She felt trapped, isolated, and lost in the whirlwind of her own life. Her family's rejection weighed heavily on her. The isolation from them was unbearable. She had no support, but she had her children, and that was all she needed. However, the marriage began to deteriorate, and eventually she made the difficult decision to divorce him. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, but she knew it was necessary for her peace and the future of her sons. As she walked away from the marriage, she realized how much she had to start over. Alone with 3 young boys, she moved to another city, carrying nothing but hope and a deep belief that somehow, she would find a way. The move to the new city was a fresh start, but it wasn't easy. She had no support system, no family to lean on, and no job to sustain her. The world outside seemed vast and cold. She had no choice but to hustle, to fight for her survival and for the future of her children. Every day was a battle, but she was determined not to let her sons see her despair. They were too young to understand, but old enough to sense that their mother was struggling. She took up any job she could find. From working in small retail stores to cleaning houses, she did whatever it took to put food on the table. She often stayed up late into the night, planning for the next day, figuring out how to stretch every dollar. There were many nights she went to bed hungry, but her children never knew. She didn't want them to worry. She was their rock, and she would be damned if they saw her fall. In those early days, there were times when she felt hopeless. The weight of the world seemed too heavy to carry, and there were moments when she considered giving up. But then, she would look at her sons, their innocent faces full of trust and love, and she would find the strength to continue. They were her reason, her purpose. She couldn't afford to fail them. As the years passed, she learned to adapt. She made new friends, formed a small network of people who respected her determination and work ethic. Slowly, her situation improved. She got better jobs, moved to a better apartment, and started to gain a sense of stability. But she never forgot the struggles she had faced. Every step forward was a victory, and every setback was a lesson in resilience. Through it all, she kept her sons' futures at the forefront of her mind. She wanted to provide them with a life better than the one she had known. She worked tirelessly to ensure they had every opportunity to succeed. Despite the hardships, she never allowed her children to feel the weight of her struggles. They were always her priority, and she made sure they had everything they needed, from school supplies to emotional support. But even as her life slowly improved, a deep emptiness remained within her. She missed her family. She missed the bond she once had with her parents and sisters. But the bridge between them had been burned when she chose to marry against their wishes. The wound of rejection never fully healed, but she carried it silently, hoping that one day they would see her for who she had become, a strong, independent woman who had built her own success. Years went by, and with each passing day, she grew more and more determined to rebuild her life. Her sons were now older, and their futures were becoming clearer. Her middle son, always the most curious of the three, was passionate about science, often spending hours reading books and tinkering with gadgets. Her eldest son was starting to show interest in leadership and business, already coming up with ideas for small ventures. The youngest, always the quiet thinker, had a natural gift for numbers and finance. She realized that, despite everything she had been through, she had succeeded in giving her children a solid foundation. They were smart, capable, and driven, much like she had been when she was young. She often thought about how far she had come, from a young woman rejected by her family to a mother who was raising 3 sons with promise. But in the back of her mind, there was always this nagging question. Would they ever see me as successful? The pain of her family's abandonment still stung, and although she had learned to live without them, she couldn't help but wish for reconciliation. She dreamed of attending her father's 60th birthday celebration, where she could finally prove to them that she had made something of herself. It had been 20 years since she had left her family's home. She had spent those years building her life from the ground up, working tirelessly, and enduring countless hardships. But the idea of returning to her family's house filled her with both hope and dread. Could she face them after all this time? Would they still see her as the rebellious daughter who had defied them? Despite her fears, she decided to go. She wanted to show her sons that family, even one so fractured, was worth attempting to heal. She called her mother, who had remained somewhat in touch, and asked if she could come to the birthday party. Her mother, always supportive, welcomed her with open arms. She told her that her siblings had never truly forgiven her, but that her mother had always believed in her. The day of the celebration arrived, and she dressed in her best attire, trying to look the part of a woman who had succeeded. She was nervous, but she told herself that it didn't matter what others thought. She had already proven to herself that she was strong. The only thing that mattered was the future of her children. As she and her 3 sons arrived at the venue, the tension in the air was palpable. Her heart pounded in her chest. She could see her father, his face glowing with happiness as he greeted guests, and her sisters, who stood by his side. But there was no warm welcome for her. The smiles on their faces were tight, forced. She could see the judgment in their eyes. As she stepped further into the room, she could feel all eyes on her. Her sons, who had always been the light of her life, were standing close beside her. They were excited, too. For the first time, they were about to meet their extended family. Her middle son, the one who had the most curiosity for the world, tugged on her sleeve, asking her where they would sit. She smiled gently, but inside, the nervousness was starting to take over. It felt like she was an outsider looking in, standing in the very place she once belonged but now seemed like a stranger. Her father, ever the pillar of the family, came over to greet her, but his embrace was stiff. He patted her back, and she could feel the coolness in his touch. "It's good to see you," he said in a manner that didn't quite match the words. It was as if the years had stretched between them, creating a gulf too wide to cross with a simple hug. Her sisters, once so close to her, stood off to the side, whispering to each other. They exchanged glances, but neither of them made any move to approach her. The shame she had felt all those years ago, when she had defied her family, seemed to have followed her into the room. They had not forgotten her choices, her rejection of their expectations, and the hurt that came with it. Her mother, however, stood apart from the coldness of the others. She came to her side with open arms, her face filled with the same warmth that had always characterized her love. "I'm so glad you came," her mother whispered, her eyes gleaming with unshed tears. She didn't care about the years that had passed or the judgments of the others. Her love for her daughter had never wavered, but that was the only comfort she had in that room. As the evening wore on, it became clear that her presence was an unwelcome one. Her sisters didn't even try to make small talk. The other relatives who had once been kind to her, now only looked at her with pity or disdain. They all assumed that she was still struggling, still trapped in the same place she had been when they had last seen her. There was an unspoken assumption that she had failed, that she hadn't succeeded in the ways that they expected her to. The moment that hurt her the most, however, came when her sisters tried to throw her out of the house. The party was in full swing, and she was standing near the window, watching her sons play with some of their distant cousins. She heard a raised voice behind her. "You don't belong here," one of her sisters said sharply, her words laced with bitterness. "You made your choice all those years ago, and you've never come back. You're not welcome in this family. You're just a reminder of how you disappointed everyone." Her heart sank, and she could feel the tears burning behind her eyes. She had never imagined this moment, this public humiliation. All her efforts to build a life, all the years she had spent raising her children, the sacrifices she had made, none of it seemed to matter in that room. In their eyes, she was still the girl who had gone against their wishes. But before she could say anything, her 3 sons, who had been standing at the other end of the room, walked toward her. Their faces were calm, but there was an undeniable determination in their steps. Her heart swelled with pride. These were her children, the very same boys who had grown up watching her struggle, who had seen her sacrifice so much for them. And now, they were about to show her family the lesson they had never learned. The room went quiet as her 3 sons approached her, their expressions serious but composed. It was a striking contrast to the tense and judgmental energy that had hung in the air since their arrival. She could see the surprise in her family's eyes. They had never expected these boys to speak up. After all, they were just children, or so they thought. Her eldest son, the one who had always shown a knack for leadership, stepped forward first. He was tall, poised, and his presence commanded attention. "I think it's time for some clarity," he said, his voice firm and clear, cutting through the silence like a sharp blade. His words were calm, but the strength behind them was unmistakable. "What my mother has done for us is nothing short of heroic. You may not see it, but she's built a life for us from the ground up. She worked multiple jobs, sacrificed everything, just to give us a better future." He paused for a moment, letting the words settle in. His voice lowered, but there was still an undeniable strength in his tone. "We're not the family you once knew. We are successful because of her, because of the sacrifices she made and the values she instilled in us." Her father's face twitched, his mouth opening as if to speak, but her son wasn't done yet. He was just getting started. "My mother never asked for sympathy," he continued. "She never asked for your approval. She did what she had to do because she loved us. She didn't need your validation to succeed. And let me make one thing clear, we, her children, are not failures." The room was still. Her sisters, who had tried to belittle her earlier, now looked as though they had been struck speechless. Her mother, standing by her side, couldn't hide the proud smile that tugged at her lips. She had always known her daughter's strength, but to hear it from her grandchildren, to see them stand up for her, it was beyond anything she could have hoped for. Her middle son, the quiet and thoughtful one who had always been obsessed with the stars and the mysteries of space, then spoke up. He was calm, but his words carried the weight of years of hard work and dedication. "I'm a scientist," he said simply, his voice filled with a quiet confidence that made it impossible for anyone to dismiss. "I've spent my life studying the universe, learning how things work, how things can be built from nothing into something great. And that's what our mother did. She built us into something great." His words hit home. Many of the family members were in awe, realizing for the first time the kind of success her children had achieved. They hadn't just grown into ordinary men. They had become extraordinary. And then her youngest son, the one with the natural gift for finance, stepped forward. He had always been the most introspective of the 3, but when he spoke, it was clear that his words carried the power of years of understanding. "You all think that success is defined by status, by wealth, or by the approval of others," he began. "But let me tell you something, true success is about resilience. It's about overcoming challenges, not relying on others to give you validation." He paused, looking around at each of the family members. My mother never needed your approval, and neither do we. We are successful because we earned it. We didn't let setbacks define us. And most importantly, we didn't let anyone, not even our own family, dictate what we were capable of achieving. The room was now silent, each family member processing the gravity of his words. They had expected a broken woman, a woman who had failed. But what they saw in front of them were three men who had defied all odds, who had been shaped by the strength of the woman they called mother. They were successful beyond measure, and they owed it all to her. Her heart swelled with pride, but it was also bittersweet. All those years of struggle, of being dismissed by her own family, seemed to have finally come to a head. Her sons had stood up for her in a way that she could never have imagined. And in doing so, they had given her the ultimate validation. It wasn't about what her family thought anymore. It was about what her children knew. The room remained silent, and the weight of her son's words lingered in the air. Her family, who had once judged her every move, now found themselves questioning everything they had once believed. Her sisters stood frozen, their faces a mix of surprise, guilt, and shame. The other relatives, who had been whispering about her failures, now stared in disbelief. They had never considered for a moment that the quiet, humble woman who had walked into their lives 20 years ago was capable of such strength, and that her sons, now standing before them, were evidence of that strength. Her father, who had once been the pillar of the family, stood quietly in the corner, his eyes darting from his grandchildren to his daughters. It was clear that he was wrestling with the truth. He had spent years believing that his daughter had chosen a life of struggle, that her defiance of his authority had led her down a difficult path. But now, seeing the men her sons had become the founder and CEO of a top tech company, a renowned space scientist, and the world's leading fund manager, he couldn't deny the greatness they had achieved, and the undeniable role their mother had played in shaping them. Her sisters, after a long moment of silence, exchanged a look. It was clear that the words her sons had spoken had reached them. The coldness in their eyes began to soften, but the bitterness still lingered. One of her sisters, the eldest, finally broke the silence. Her voice was shaky, but she spoke with sincerity. I didn't realize, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I never understood how much you sacrificed for your children. I've been so focused on what we thought was right that I never saw the strength in what you did. I am sorry. Her other sister, who had been the most critical of her, hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward as well. I was wrong to judge you. We all were. We didn't understand the kind of person you were, and the kind of strength you had. I see it now. Her voice cracked as she spoke, the weight of years of distance between them finally beginning to lift. Her heart ached as she listened to their apologies. It wasn't easy to forgive the pain they had caused her, the years of rejection, the judgment, and the coldness they had shown. But in that moment, she realized that true healing could only happen when there was honesty, when people were willing to face the truth, no matter how painful. Her mother, who had stood by her side through thick and thin, stepped forward, holding her daughter's hand tightly. You've always been the one who showed us what real strength looks like, she said softly. I'm proud of you, always have been, and always will be. Tears welled up in her eyes. After all these years of feeling abandoned and misunderstood, she finally felt the warmth of acceptance, not just from her mother, but from her siblings too. The wounds of the past were still fresh, but the first steps toward healing had been made. It wasn't about the lavish birthday party or the material wealth that some of her family members had. It wasn't about who had the biggest house or the flashiest car. It was about the love, the respect, and the strength they had all been able to acknowledge in that moment. The lesson her sons had taught her family was not just about success, but about the power of perseverance, sacrifice, and love. Her sons, standing proud in front of her, had shown the world what their mother had always known, that success isn't defined by wealth or status, but by the ability to rise above challenges and stay true to what matters most. The love and sacrifice for the ones you care about. Tears welled up in her eyes. After all these years of feeling abandoned and misunderstood, She finally felt the warmth of acceptance, not just from her mother, but from her siblings too. The wounds of the past were still fresh, but the first steps toward healing had been made. It wasn't about the lavish birthday party or the material wealth that some of her family members had. It wasn't about who had the biggest house or the flashiest car. It was about the love, the respect, and the strength they had all been able to acknowledge in that moment. The lesson her sons had taught her family was not just about success, but about the power of perseverance, sacrifice, and love. Her sons, standing proud in front of her, had shown the world what their mother had always known, that success isn't defined by wealth or status, but by the ability to rise above challenges and stay true to what matters most. The love and sacrifice for the ones you care about. The evening took on a different tone after the confrontation. What had started as an event filled with judgment and coldness was now turning into a moment of reflection. The family members who had once cast her aside now found themselves grappling with the realization that they had been wrong. They had underestimated her, dismissed her, and failed to see the remarkable woman she had become. But the truth had been revealed, and for the first time in years, the walls between them began to crumble. Her sisters, though still somewhat hesitant, approached her slowly, as if unsure of how to bridge the distance that had grown between them. The eldest sister was the first to step forward, her voice filled with regret. "I've spent so many years thinking I knew what was best for you. I didn't understand what you were going through, or the choices you had to make. I should have supported you, but instead I judged you. I'm sorry for that." The apology, though long overdue, felt like a weight lifting off her shoulders. For years, she had carried the bitterness of their rejection, and hearing their acknowledgement of her struggles, their understanding of what she had been through, was a small but significant victory. It was as though the first chapter of her painful journey had finally come to an end. Her other sister, who had been more critical in the past, nodded silently, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I've always been proud of you, even if I never showed it. I didn't know how to say it, but I should have been there for you. You were right all along to make your own choices, and I was wrong to try to control them. You've done something extraordinary, and I respect you for it." Her mother, who had stood by her side unwaveringly through all the years, smiled softly, watching as her daughters began to reconcile. "Sometimes, it takes seeing things from a different perspective to understand the truth," she said, her voice full of emotion. "We all have our paths, our struggles, but we also have the ability to learn and grow from our mistakes." For the first time in a long while, the family felt whole again. The hurt of the past didn't disappear overnight, but the seeds of healing had been planted. There was a sense of humility in the air, a realization that success is not defined by the opinions of others, but by the choices one makes and the strength to keep going, no matter the odds. Her sons, standing quietly by her side, had done more than just defend her that evening. They had shown her family what real success looked like, not in wealth or titles, but in character, resilience, and the ability to rise above the struggles life throws at you. They had not just made their mother proud, but they had made their entire family realize what true greatness is. The evening slowly wound down, and as the party continued, there was a newfound sense of camaraderie. Her family members began to mingle more freely, and the old barriers of judgment and resentment began to fade. The conversations that had once been filled with condescension were now filled with mutual respect. Her father, who had stood silent for so long, approached her after a while. His face, which had once been stern and full of disapproval, was now softened with a look of pride. He placed his hand on her shoulder and spoke quietly, but with sincerity. "I didn't know how to say it before, but I'm proud of you. You've shown a strength that I didn't fully understand. You've raised 3 fine young men, and I can see now that the choices you made were your own, and they were the right ones." For the first time in years, she felt the weight of his approval, the validation she had longed for but never received. It wasn't about the apology, it wasn't about the acknowledgement of her past struggles. It was about the recognition of her journey, her growth, and the success she had achieved, and not just for herself, but for her children as well. As the evening wore on and the party began to wind down, she stood by the window, looking out at the fading light of the setting sun. It had been a long, difficult journey, and as she looked around at her family, her heart felt a strange mix of gratitude, sadness, and relief. The years of feeling alone, the years of rejection and judgment, seemed to be melting away. But there was something more important than just the reconciliation with her family that night. It was the realization that, in the end, her journey had always been her own. She had made the choices she believed were right, even when the world around her tried to make her doubt herself. She had been through struggles no one could imagine, yet she had come out stronger on the other side. And through it all, her sons had stood by her, their loyalty and love unwavering. They had given her the ultimate reward, the understanding that she had raised them to be kind, driven, and compassionate. As her family members began to leave, and the house grew quieter, her 3 sons gathered around her. Their faces were filled with pride, not just for what they had achieved, but for the woman who had taught them that success is not measured by external validation, but by perseverance, love, and the courage to stay true to one's values. Her eldest son, the CEO, was the first to speak, his voice full of emotion. "Mom, tonight wasn't just about showing them who we've become. It was about showing them who you are. Your strength is the reason we are where we are today. You didn't give up on us, and because of that, we learned never to give up on ourselves." Her middle son, the space scientist, added, "We've seen how hard you've worked, how much you've sacrificed. And the greatest lesson you've taught us is that success isn't about status or money. It's about the ability to keep going, no matter how hard things get. And that's what you did every single day for us." Her youngest son, the fund manager, nodded in agreement. "You've been the rock we've needed, the example we've followed. We may have achieved success in our own ways, but none of it would have been possible without you. You've shown us the true meaning of resilience, and that's something that no one can take away." She felt her heart swell with love as her sons stood there, their words ringing in her ears. They had not only understood the sacrifices she had made, but they had internalized the lessons she had taught them. They had become the men she had always hoped they would be, not just in terms of their achievements, but in their character. As the night came to an end and her family began to leave, she stood at the door, watching them go. There was no animosity, no lingering resentment. The years of distance between her and her family had been bridged, and though the past could not be undone, the future now held the possibility of new beginnings. Her mother walked up to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've done it," she said softly, her voice filled with pride. "You've shown them what you're made of, and now, they see you for who you truly are, a woman of incredible strength, courage, and love." She smiled, her heart full. The road ahead was still uncertain, and there would always be challenges to face. But for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace with who she had become. She had built a life for her sons, one filled with hope and promise. She had raised them to be men who would one day change the world in their own ways. And in doing so, she had taught them a lesson that would last a lifetime. The days following the birthday celebration were filled with quiet reflection. The family, though not entirely healed, had begun to mend. Her sisters reached out more frequently, engaging in conversations that were warmer than they had been in years. Her father, though still distant, had made small gestures of reconnection, and for the first time, she could see the beginnings of genuine pride in his eyes. Her heart, once burdened by the weight of abandonment, felt lighter, though the journey toward complete healing was still ongoing. Her sons, though busy with their own lives, made sure to check in on her regularly. Their success had not altered the deep respect they had for her. They had never seen her as the woman who had failed or had been abandoned by their family. To them, she was the embodiment of everything they aspired to be: strong, determined, and unyielding in the face of adversity. In the quiet of her apartment, she often found herself reflecting on how far she had come. There had been times when the thought of starting over felt impossible, when the weight of the world seemed too heavy to bear. But now, as she stood looking back on her life, she saw not the scars of struggle, but the markers of resilience. She was no longer just a woman who had endured hardship. She was a woman who had triumphed, against all odds. Her identity had been so intertwined with the roles she had played for others, daughter, wife, mother, that she had forgotten the most important role of all, herself. For so many years, she had defined her worth through the lens of her family's approval and society's expectations. But now, she understood that her value was not determined by external recognition. It was defined by her strength, her ability to adapt, and her unrelenting love for her children. One evening, as she sat with her sons, the conversation turned to their individual journeys and the lessons they had learned along the way. Her eldest son, now the CEO of a top tech company, shared how his success had been shaped by his mother's influence. "Mom," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "There were so many times when I doubted myself, especially early in my career, but I always remembered what you taught me. You didn't just teach me how to work hard, you taught me how to believe in myself, even when no one else did." Her middle son, the space scientist, nodded in agreement. "You gave us the courage to chase our dreams, no matter how far-fetched they seemed. You never told us to settle for what was easy. You showed us that greatness comes from pushing through the hardest times." Her youngest son, the fund manager, added, "And you taught us that true success isn't about fame or fortune. It's about finding purpose, helping others, and staying grounded in what matters most." Each of them spoke of how her resilience had shaped their lives, how her quiet strength had been the foundation upon which they had built their success. And in that moment, she realized that the legacy she had created was not just one of financial success or professional achievements. It was a legacy of character, integrity, and unwavering love. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly proud of herself. Not for what she had accomplished, but for who she had become. She had walked through fire and emerged stronger, more resilient, and more whole than she had ever imagined. She had given her children the tools they needed to succeed, and in doing so, she had built a future for them that was brighter than anything she had ever dared to dream. The years continued to unfold, and with each passing day, she embraced the quiet joy that had once eluded her. The deep sense of fulfillment she had always sought wasn't found in grand accomplishments or the approval of others. It was in the simple moments, watching her sons thrive, feeling the unconditional love of her family, and knowing that her life, though shaped by struggles, was now filled with peace. Her sons were becoming their own men, with each of them carving out their own space in the world. They had exceeded not only her expectations but the expectations of the world around them. They were proof that resilience, hard work, and love could create something extraordinary, even from the most difficult of circumstances. Her eldest son, the tech entrepreneur, had recently been invited to speak at a global conference about the future of artificial intelligence. He had grown into a visionary leader, someone who wasn't just focused on building a business, but on creating something that could change lives for the better. He was already planning initiatives that would help bridge the gap between technology and underprivileged communities, bringing the benefits of innovation to those who needed it most. Her middle son, the space scientist, had recently made a groundbreaking discovery in the field of astrophysics. His work had the potential to redefine humanity's understanding of space, and he was already collaborating with top researchers to develop technology that could one day make space travel more accessible. He often spoke about how his mother's encouragement had led him to pursue his passion, even when others doubted his ambitions. Her youngest son, the fund manager, had taken on a leadership role at one of the world's most respected investment firms. He was known for his thoughtful, ethical approach to finance, and his work had helped thousands of people secure their futures. He had always been quiet, humble, and thoughtful, and his ability to make calculated, responsible decisions was a testament to the lessons his mother had instilled in him about integrity and hard work. As she watched her sons achieve their dreams, she realized that they had become not only successful, but compassionate leaders who used their success to lift others up. They had inherited not just her drive but her values. The importance of kindness, the need to give back, and the understanding that true success isn't just about personal gain, but about making a positive impact on the world around you. But even as her sons reached new heights, she knew her own journey was far from over. She had built a life for herself, one that was no longer defined by the expectations of others or the pain of the past. She had created a future that was uniquely hers, and it was filled with possibility. She was now in her 40s, a woman who had experienced more than most people could imagine, but who had come through it all with a newfound sense of purpose and clarity. It was time for her to step into the next phase of her own life. She had spent so many years focused on the needs of others, on making sure her children had everything they needed, on building a life from the ground up. But now, she was ready to turn some of that attention inward. She began taking classes in subjects that had always fascinated her: creative writing, art, philosophy. She enrolled in a local community center where she learned new skills, met new people, and embraced the idea of discovering new passions. Her relationships with her family, especially her sisters, continued to improve. They spent more time together, and though things were never perfect, they had built a new foundation of respect and understanding. She no longer felt like an outsider in her own family. Her sisters had apologized, and more importantly, they had changed their views. They now saw her not just as the rebellious daughter, but as a woman who had overcome adversity and achieved greatness in her own way. But perhaps the greatest gift of all was the legacy she had created for her sons. They were not just successful in their careers, they were also kind, empathetic, and dedicated to making a difference in the world. And they never forgot the lessons she had taught them about resilience, hard work, and the power of love. She often thought back to the day when she had first left her family's home, when the world had seemed like an unforgiving place. She had no idea how she would make it, how she would survive, or what kind of future she could offer her children. But she had pushed forward, and in doing so, she had created a future that was beyond her wildest dreams. Her story was one of triumph, of rising from the ashes of rejection, heartbreak, and failure to build a life of purpose, strength, and love. It was a story that showed the world that no matter where you start, no matter the obstacles you face, you have the power to change your destiny. And most importantly, it was a story that showed her sons, and the world, that success is not defined by the opinions of others, but by the courage to follow your heart, the strength to face your challenges, and the love you give and receive along the way. As the years passed, her life continued to evolve, and the lessons she had learned over the course of her journey became more and more apparent. One of the most profound realizations was the power of forgiveness, not just for her family, but for herself. For so long, she had carried the weight of anger and resentment, feelings that had kept her shackled to the past. But with time, she understood that to fully embrace her future, she had to let go of the pain that had held her back. Her relationship with her family, especially her parents, had been strained for so many years. But now, with her sons as a living testament to her strength, she felt ready to let go of the bitterness that had once defined her view of them. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't about forgetting the past or excusing the wrongs that had been done. It was about freeing herself from the chains of resentment. Her father, who had never truly accepted her decision to marry against his wishes, was now aging, his once robust health starting to wane. There were moments of vulnerability in him that she hadn't noticed before. His once stern face had softened, and there was a weariness in his eyes that made her realize how much he, too, had suffered over the years. He had never been the type to express his emotions openly, but the cracks in his armor had started to show. One evening, after a long day of work, she found herself sitting in the living room with her father, just the two of them. He sat in his favorite chair, staring out the window at the sunset. She had learned to sit quietly with him over the years, respecting the space he needed but never shying away from being there when he was ready to talk. "I've been thinking a lot about the past lately," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "I know I was hard on you, more than I should have been, and I want you to know that I've always loved you, even if I didn't show it the way I should have." Her heart skipped a beat. This was the moment she had longed for, the moment she had never expected to come. But it was here now, and it was more than she could have ever imagined. "I know you did what you thought was best," she replied, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "And I understand now that we were all doing the best we could with what we knew at the time." The two of them sat in silence for a while, the years of tension between them dissipating in that quiet moment. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was the first step toward healing the wounds of the past. She realized that forgiving him, as difficult as it was, would allow her to fully step into her future without being haunted by the pain of the past. It was a process that would take time, but it was a process she was ready to begin. Her mother, too, had shown signs of growing older, and their relationship had deepened over the years. She had always been her biggest supporter, and now, more than ever, her mother's wisdom and love were a constant source of strength for her. They spent hours talking, reminiscing about the past, and reflecting on how much they had both grown. Her mother, though much older now, still had the same unwavering belief in her that had kept her going through the toughest times. Her relationship with her sisters, too, continued to improve. They no longer saw her as the rebel who had torn the family apart. They saw her as a woman who had fought for her happiness, for her children, and had created a life that was full of love, respect, and success. They had apologized, and while it had taken time, they had come to understand the sacrifices she had made and the strength it had taken for her to rebuild her life. For her sons, the lessons she had instilled in them about resilience and hard work had taken root. They were all successful in their own right, but they also understood the importance of humility, kindness, and empathy. Her eldest son, the CEO, had started a foundation that provided scholarships to young students from underprivileged backgrounds, offering them the opportunities he had been fortunate enough to have. Her middle son, the space scientist, was working on a project to develop sustainable technologies for space exploration that could also benefit life on Earth. And her youngest son, the fund manager, had dedicated a portion of his wealth to charitable causes that focused on financial literacy and empowerment for women in developing countries. She had raised them to be not just successful professionals, but compassionate human beings who understood the importance of giving back and using their positions of power to make a difference. And in doing so, she had created a legacy that would extend far beyond her own lifetime. A legacy of love, resilience, and the power of forgiveness. As the years went on, she continued to see the ripple effects of her choices. The influence of her motherhood, her resilience, and her determination had extended far beyond the walls of her home. Her sons were not just living successful lives, they were actively creating positive change in the world. They often spoke of her wisdom, her sacrifices, and her teachings as the foundation for everything they had accomplished. Her example had shaped them into men who didn't just aim for success for themselves, but who wanted to leave the world better than they found it. Her eldest son, now leading a major tech company, had created initiatives aimed at providing access to education and technology to communities that were often left behind in the digital age. His company's social responsibility programs had helped thousands of children gain access to online learning platforms, many of whom came from backgrounds similar to his own. He spoke regularly at conferences, sharing the story of his mother and how her hard work and sacrifice had paved the way for his own success. Her middle son, the space scientist, had become a symbol of hope for many young aspiring scientists. He worked tirelessly on space exploration projects, not just for the sake of discovery, but to advance technologies that could improve life on Earth. He was passionate about sustainability, and he often used his platform to advocate for environmental causes. He spoke of his mother's strength and how she had never told him that his dreams were too big, even when they seemed impossible. His work, too, was making a tangible impact on both Earth and beyond. Her youngest son, the fund manager, had achieved financial success on a global scale, but his focus was always on responsible investing. He dedicated a significant portion of his wealth to empowering women entrepreneurs and supporting social enterprises that prioritize people over profits. He believed that financial success should be used as a tool for creating equity and opportunity, and his efforts were helping many to build sustainable businesses in underserved communities. But perhaps the most powerful realization for her was that all three of her sons, despite their immense success, had never lost sight of what truly mattered. They were kind, humble, and grounded. They didn't let the world's recognition of their achievements cloud their sense of responsibility to others. They understood the importance of family, of love, and of giving back. And this, she realized, was the true measure of success. As she watched her sons grow into men who would leave a lasting impact on the world, she knew that her work was done. She had not just provided them with food and shelter. She had given them the tools to navigate the world with integrity and compassion. She had shown them the importance of resilience, of not letting adversity define you, and of always striving to be a better version of yourself. But the impact of her love didn't stop with her sons. Her family, too, had been transformed. Her parents, once so firm in their judgment of her, had come to understand her in a way they never had before. Her father, now older and more reflective, would often tell her how proud he was of her, of everything she had overcome and achieved. Her sisters, who had once stood on the sidelines, now stood by her side, supporting her every step of the way. They had watched her rise, and in doing so, they had learned the true meaning of strength and perseverance. Her story, though born from hardship, had become a story of inspiration. It was a reminder to all who knew her that no matter how difficult life may seem, it is possible to overcome even the greatest of obstacles. It was a story of love, sacrifice, and determination, qualities that, when combined, had the power to change lives. And as she sat in her quiet home, surrounded by her children and family, she realized that the best part of her journey wasn't the success she had achieved. It was the love that had been shared along the way. Love for her children, for her family, for herself. It was this love that had carried her through the darkest times and had fueled her drive to create a future not just for herself, but for everyone she loved. Her sons, now fully grown and accomplished in their own right, would continue to shape the future, but she knew that they would always carry the lessons she had taught them. They would continue to change the world, just as she had once dreamed. And in doing so, they would honor the sacrifice and strength of the woman who had never given up on them, even when the world had given up on her. With time, she became more involved in community outreach. Though her sons were busy with their global projects, she had always believed in the power of individual action. She wasn't just the woman who had raised world changers. She had her own sense of purpose. The lessons she had learned from her struggles, resilience, hard work, and the power of self-belief, were the very principles she shared with others. She joined various local organizations focused on empowering women and children, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds. Many of the women she met were in situations she had once known all too well, feeling trapped, overlooked, and without hope. She shared her story with them, not as a way to boast, but as a way to offer a beacon of hope. "I was once where you are," she would say to a room full of women who had lost their sense of direction. "I didn't have a silver spoon in my mouth. I didn't have anyone to fall back on. But I had something more powerful than any of that. I had the strength within me to keep going. And I'm here to tell you that you have that same strength inside of you." She hosted workshops on self-confidence, entrepreneurship, and financial independence. She taught women how to set goals and achieve them, how to navigate the tough moments, and how to surround themselves with people who truly supported their dreams. Her message resonated deeply, as it wasn't about grandiose success or fame. It was about taking control of your life, no matter how small the steps were at first. The more she worked with these women, the more she realized how much her own experience had shaped her ability to teach. She had always thought of herself as an ordinary woman, someone who had simply done what she had to do to survive. But through her work with others, she saw how extraordinary her story truly was. It wasn't just about the struggles she had endured. It was about how she had turned those struggles into the fuel for her own personal transformation. She had taken her hardships and turned them into stepping stones. Her story was not just a tale of survival, it was one of empowerment. She wasn't just teaching women how to survive their situations. She was teaching them how to rise above them. She had given them the permission to dream, to aim higher, and to believe that their past did not dictate their future. Her outreach efforts gained attention from local media outlets, and soon, she was invited to speak at conferences and panels about overcoming adversity. She became a role model to women everywhere who had faced challenges, whether financial, emotional, or societal, and had been told they couldn't succeed. But even as her recognition grew, she remained humble. The true reward for her was in the quiet conversations she had with women after her talks, the tears of gratitude that were shared, and the stories of women who had transformed their lives, who had used the tools she had given them to rise above their circumstances. That was her greatest success. Not the accolades or awards, but the impact she was having on others' lives. Her sons, now fully grown and global leaders in their respective fields, took pride in her work. They understood that their mother's journey had never been about seeking recognition or validation. It had always been about making a difference. They had learned from her that success wasn't something you chased. It was something you created through perseverance, passion, and, above all, a deep sense of purpose. Her legacy, though deeply intertwined with her children's accomplishments, was also her own. She had built her own empire, not of wealth or material success, but of empowerment, love, and the ability to inspire others to believe in themselves. As she sat with her sons one evening, now adults who had achieved more than she could have imagined, she smiled softly. They had always been her pride, but now, as she looked at them, she realized they had become her greatest teachers. They had shown her that love, when combined with resilience, could create ripples of change that stretched far beyond the family. Her life had been a testament to the power of believing in oneself, no matter the odds. And as her sons shared their latest accomplishments with her, she felt a deep sense of peace. Her journey had not been easy, but it had been beautiful. She had faced adversity, but in the end, she had won, through the love of her children, the support of those she had helped, and the realization that success was not about titles or wealth, but about making a lasting impact on the world around you. Her legacy would live on, not in the pages of history books, but in the hearts and minds of everyone she had touched. She had built a legacy of empowerment, one woman and one child at a time. And as long as the lessons of love, resilience, and empowerment were passed on, her story would never truly end. As the years continued to pass, the story of her life, one filled with hardship, triumph, and love, became a beacon of hope for those who felt overlooked or stuck. Her work with women's empowerment grew to new heights, and her efforts were recognized by national organizations dedicated to social change. She had become not just a survivor but a changemaker, and her name was spoken with respect in communities across the country. But amid all the recognition and success, she remained the same woman at her core, the mother who had fought for her children, the daughter who had reconciled with her past, and the woman who had never lost faith in herself, no matter how hard the road had been. Her humility, her kindness, and her unwavering belief in the power of second chances had become the foundation of her life. She often reflected on the life she had lived, the struggles, the sacrifices, the heartache, and the triumphs, and realized that she had done exactly what she had set out to do. She had given her children a future. And in doing so, she had created a legacy far more significant than she could have imagined. Her sons, now leading in their respective fields, often returned home to visit, sharing stories of their successes and their dreams for the future. They had all become champions of the causes their mother had instilled in them: education, technology for good, and financial independence for women. They had become living testaments to her belief that hard work and perseverance could overcome even the greatest obstacles. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, the family was reminiscing about the past. Her eldest son, the CEO, stood up and raised his glass in a toast. "To the woman who taught us that success isn't about fame or fortune, but about character and resilience," he said, his voice full of emotion. "You've shown us that no matter how tough life gets, we can always rise above. You've made us who we are, and will continue to make the world a better place because of you." Her middle son, the space scientist, added, "You taught us that no dream is too big, and no setback is permanent. You showed us that greatness comes from determination, not from external validation. And because of you, we are working to change the world." Her youngest son, the fund manager, smiled warmly. "You've always told us that success is about how we give back. And because of you, we know that real wealth comes from making a difference in the lives of others." Her heart swelled with pride as she listened to her sons. They had become the men she had always hoped they would be. Not just successful, but kind, compassionate, and driven by a purpose far greater than themselves. They had truly learned the lessons she had taught them, and they were living proof that love, hard work, and resilience could shape the future. As they all sat together that evening, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had gone through so much to get here, and now, sitting at the table with her sons, she knew that she had done it all for them. She had fought, struggled, and sacrificed, but she had given them something invaluable: the belief that they could achieve anything they set their minds to, no matter the obstacles. And as her sons continued to build their futures, making their own marks on the world, she knew her work wasn't over. It had never been just about her journey. It had always been about creating a legacy that would continue to inspire future generations. Her life, once full of uncertainty, had come full circle. She had started as a young woman, uncertain of her place in the world, but she had become a force to be reckoned with. She had rebuilt her life from the ground up, and in the process, she had changed the course of her family's future. She had raised 3 sons who would go on to change the world in their own ways. And now, as she looked back on her journey, she saw it for what it truly was: a story of love, resilience, and the incredible power of believing in yourself. She had proved that no matter where you start, no matter the hardships you face, you can always rise. She had proven that success is not measured by wealth or status, but by the legacy you leave behind, by the lives you touch, the hearts you heal, and the way you inspire others to believe in themselves. Her story wasn't just hers alone. It was a story for anyone who had ever faced hardship, anyone who had ever been told they couldn't succeed. It was a story that said, "You are enough, you are capable, and no matter what, you can make it." As the evening drew to a close, surrounded by her family, her heart was full. She had come so far, and the road ahead was still long. But she knew that with love, determination, and the unwavering belief in herself, there was nothing she couldn't accomplish. And with that, she smiled, knowing that her legacy of strength, love, and resilience would live on for generations to come. Years continued to pass, but the story of her life, the lessons she taught, and the legacy she built, never lost its significance. Her outreach work, community involvement, and advocacy for women's rights expanded, and she found herself not only speaking at local gatherings but also at international conferences. She became a voice for those who were unheard, a champion for the overlooked, and a symbol of resilience for millions of people who had faced adversity. Her foundation for women's empowerment had grown into one of the leading organizations in the country, with projects spanning from mentorship programs to financial literacy courses. It was a dream she had never imagined, but one that she knew was making a lasting impact. Through the foundation, women found support, resources, and community to help them overcome the very struggles she had once faced. She had created a network that was empowering women to not only survive, but thrive, teaching them how to rebuild their lives just as she had rebuilt hers. She often received messages from women who had been inspired by her story, who had found the courage to leave toxic relationships, who had started businesses, or had simply found their own voice in the world. Each message, each success story, was a testament to the power of one person's ability to spark change in the lives of others. Her sons, despite their massive success, remained deeply involved in their mother's work. They understood the importance of giving back, not just because of the success they had achieved, but because of the values their mother had instilled in them. Her eldest son, the tech CEO, had initiated a global scholarship program through his company, offering financial support to young women interested in pursuing careers in STEM fields. Her middle son, the space scientist, worked with NASA to promote diversity and inclusion in space exploration, ensuring that women and minorities had the same opportunities he had once fought for. Her youngest son, the fund manager, had spearheaded an investment fund focused on women entrepreneurs and social impact projects. They continued to work together, pooling their resources and influence to support causes their mother had always believed in. It wasn't just about achieving success. It was about using their platforms to make a difference in the world. Her own journey of personal growth, however, did not stop. Though she had accomplished so much, she realized that the most important thing was never the accolades or the recognition. It was about the journey of becoming the best version of herself. She began to explore new passions, such as writing a memoir that would tell her story in more detail, sharing the lessons she had learned along the way. She worked on writing books for women and young adults, helping them understand the power of resilience and the importance of making their own choices, even when society tried to dictate their paths. She spent more time with her family, watching her sons build their families and seeing them become the fathers they had always hoped to be. It filled her heart with joy to see how they, too, were passing on the lessons she had taught them to their own children. Her relationship with her parents continued to improve, and in the twilight of their years, they had come to see her not just as the daughter who had defied them but as the woman who had built a life of purpose and strength. Her father, in particular, would often sit beside her, silently reflecting on the years that had passed, his pride in her accomplishments evident in his eyes. Though their relationship had been rocky, it had become one of mutual respect and understanding, and it had healed in a way she never thought possible. Her sisters, too, had changed. Their relationships, once marked by distance and disapproval, had blossomed into a deep friendship. They traveled together, reminisced about the past, and created new memories, knowing that their bond had grown stronger through the forgiveness and understanding they had shared. They had watched their sister build something extraordinary, and in doing so, they had learned to appreciate her not just as their sibling but as the remarkable woman she had become. Her life had become a full circle. From the rejection she once felt to the pride and respect she now commanded, it had been a journey of transformation. Not just for herself, but for those around her. The impact of her love, her resilience, and her unwavering belief in the power of second chances continued to ripple through her family, her community, and the world. Her legacy was no longer just about the life she had built but about the lives she had touched, the hearts she had healed, and the world she had changed, one woman and one child at a time. And as she sat quietly, surrounded by her loved ones, she realized that the greatest gift she had ever given the world was not her success. It was her belief in the strength of others. Through her own journey, she had taught people everywhere that no matter how dark the road may seem, there is always hope, always a way forward, and always the possibility of a better tomorrow. Her life had been a testament to the idea that we can all rise above our challenges, no matter the odds. Her legacy, built on love, strength, and resilience, would continue to inspire for generations to come. As time moved forward, her influence reached even further. The programs she had helped create continued to evolve, expanding into new areas and regions. The women who had benefited from her teachings and support were now in positions of leadership, carrying forward the torch of empowerment and resilience she had lit. Her foundation had grown into a global network, one that not only helped women rebuild their lives, but also inspired whole communities to embrace change, growth, and innovation. Her sons, now successful leaders in their own right, remained deeply involved in the causes they had all once championed as a family. They recognized the tremendous impact of their mother's teachings on their own lives, and they were dedicated to ensuring that the next generation would have the same opportunities for success and fulfillment. Her eldest son, the CEO of a major tech company, had established a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs, with a special focus on women and marginalized communities. He often worked alongside his mother, organizing community events where he could share his knowledge of building successful businesses and creating tech innovations that could change lives. He had built his company on the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and he believed deeply in empowering those who were often left out of the conversation. Her middle son, the space scientist, had continued to break new barriers in space exploration, but he had also become a passionate advocate for educational opportunities in STEM for young girls. He had worked on programs that provided scholarships for young women pursuing careers in aerospace and physics, ensuring that the future of space exploration was as diverse as the universe itself. Her youngest son, the fund manager, had started an accelerator program to help socially responsible startups gain access to funding, especially those led by women and minorities. He had built a network of investors who shared his belief that financial success could be aligned with positive social impact. Through his initiatives, countless women had been able to launch businesses that were not only profitable but also contributing to the betterment of their communities. Her grandchildren, too, were growing up in an environment where the values of resilience, compassion, and hard work were instilled in them from an early age. She took joy in watching them learn and grow, knowing that they would carry forward the lessons their parents had learned from her. They were already passionate about social causes, and many of them had expressed interest in following their parents' paths, focusing on innovation, technology, sustainability, and empowerment. Her own life, though marked by challenges, had now blossomed into a rich tapestry of love, purpose, and fulfillment. She had spent so many years fighting to create a better future for her children, but now she saw that the ripple effect of her actions had extended far beyond her immediate family. Her legacy was not only in the lives of her children, but in the lives of everyone they had touched, and in the generations that would continue to carry the lessons she had instilled in them. At family gatherings, when everyone came together to celebrate their collective achievements, she was often asked about the secret to her success. Her answer was always the same: it's not about the money, the titles, or the accolades. It's about perseverance. It's about staying true to your values, believing in yourself, and never giving up on your dreams, no matter how impossible they may seem. And most importantly, it's about using what you have to make the world a better place for others. As she grew older, she began to see the world in a new light. The struggles of her youth, the pain of rejection, and the weight of her challenges had all shaped her into the woman she was today. She had spent so many years proving her worth to the world, but now, in the twilight of her life, she realized that her worth had never been in question. It had always been about the love and strength she had shared with others, the difference she had made, and the lives she had touched. She had gone from a young woman with little more than hope and determination to a global leader, a mother, a mentor, and a symbol of resilience. Her life had been a testament to the power of believing in yourself, no matter what the world may say. She had shown the world that no matter your starting point, no matter the obstacles you face, there is always a way forward, and there is always hope. Now, as she watched her children and grandchildren flourish, as she saw the ripple of her work extend through the generations, she knew that her story would live on, not just in the pages of history, but in the hearts of those who continued to carry her lessons forward. She had proven that a single life, lived with purpose, could change the world. Her journey had begun with a single step, but it had led her to places she had never imagined. And as she looked at the legacy she had created, through her children, her work, and the impact she had made on the world, she realized that it wasn't just about what she had accomplished. It was about the love she had given, the lives she had transformed, and the world she had helped build for future generations. Her story was one of strength, resilience, and love, and as long as the world continued to share her message, her legacy would live on forever. As the years moved on, her days became quieter, but no less meaningful. She no longer had to prove anything to the world, but the work she had started and the life she had built continued to grow in ways she had never imagined. Her time was often spent reflecting, teaching, and mentoring those who sought her wisdom. The values she had always lived by, resilience, kindness, and self-belief, were now being passed on to a new generation of leaders, entrepreneurs, and changemakers. Her grandchildren, now entering their teenage years, were beginning to carve out their own paths. She could see the spark in their eyes, the same spark that had once burned brightly in her heart when she had first left her home, determined to make a life for herself. They were curious, eager, and full of dreams, much like she had been at their age. She took great joy in spending time with them, sharing her stories, and passing down the lessons that had shaped her life. One of her granddaughters, in particular, had taken a special interest in social entrepreneurship. She had often heard her grandmother speak about the importance of giving back to the community and using success to create positive change. Inspired by her grandmother's legacy, she started a project that provided access to clean water for underserved communities. It wasn't a large-scale operation yet, but the young girl's passion and commitment to making a difference reminded her of herself when she had first embarked on her own journey. Her heart swelled with pride as she watched her grandchildren step into their own shoes. She knew that the world they were inheriting was different from the one she had grown up in. It was a world of boundless possibilities, but also one fraught with its own set of challenges. And yet, she was confident that they would rise to meet those challenges just as she had, by staying true to themselves, by being resilient, and by always using their gifts to make the world a better place. Though her physical health began to slow with age, her spirit remained as strong as ever. She had lived a full and meaningful life, one that was marked by love, sacrifice, and triumph. She had seen her children and grandchildren flourish, and she had built a legacy that would continue to inspire future generations. She had faced unimaginable hardships, but she had emerged from them stronger and more determined, and she had built a life that was a testament to the power of perseverance. The community she had created through her foundation, her work, and her example continued to thrive. The young women she had mentored were now leading their own organizations, reaching out to those who were in need, and continuing to pass on the lessons of resilience and hope. The ripple effect of her work had turned into a wave, one that was sweeping across the globe and inspiring people of all backgrounds to rise above their circumstances and create change in their own lives and communities. In the quiet of her home, as she sat surrounded by family and friends, she often thought about the journey she had taken. The road had been long and difficult, but it had also been rich with lessons, love, and purpose. She had never once let go of her dreams, and she had never let anyone tell her that she couldn't achieve them. And now, as she looked back on the life she had built, she knew that it had all been worth it. Her children, her grandchildren, and the women she had mentored would continue to carry her legacy forward. They would continue to make a difference in the world, each in their own way, and they would remember the lessons she had taught them. That success is not measured by what you have, but by what you give. That resilience is the key to overcoming any obstacle, and that love, above all, is the most powerful force in the world. Her story was no longer just hers. It had become the story of everyone she had touched, everyone who had been inspired by her strength and courage. It had become a story of transformation, of love, of rising above adversity, and of creating a future full of hope and possibility. And so, as the sun set on her life, she knew that her legacy would live on forever, not just in the accomplishments of her children and grandchildren, but in the countless lives she had touched along the way. Her story had been one of struggle, but more importantly, it had been one of triumph. She had risen, she had succeeded, and she had made the world a better place for those who would follow her. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy anyone could leave. A life well lived, a heart full of love, and the knowledge that you had made a difference. As she entered the later stages of her life, she found herself more reflective than ever. The world had changed so much since her younger years, but one thing remained constant: the importance of never giving up, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. As she looked around at the generations that had followed her, her children, grandchildren, and the countless women whose lives had been transformed by her foundation, she knew that the torch was now passed on to them. She often spent her days in quiet contemplation, thinking about the legacy she had built. Her body may have slowed, but her mind remained sharp, and her heart still burned with the same passion it always had. She found solace in knowing that the seeds she had planted over the years were growing into something beautiful, a world where people no longer saw themselves as limited by their circumstances, but empowered to create change, no matter how small or large. Her grandchildren, especially, had become her greatest source of joy in her later years. They reminded her of herself when she had first begun her journey, eager to make a difference, full of hope and dreams. She loved watching them learn and grow, discovering their own unique talents, passions, and goals. She often found herself in awe of the impact they were already starting to have, whether in their schools, communities, or through the small projects they were developing to make a difference. One of her grandsons, who had always been intrigued by technology and innovation, had taken up her mantle in a new way. He had started a nonprofit that focused on bridging the digital divide for underprivileged communities, providing access to technology and teaching young people how to use it to better their lives. He often spoke about his grandmother's influence, about how her relentless pursuit of progress and equity had inspired him to find ways to empower others through technology. Her granddaughter, the one who had started the Clean Water Project, was now working with a team to expand her efforts, providing sustainable water solutions to communities in need. What had begun as a small initiative was quickly becoming a larger-scale movement, with the support of her family and the networks her grandmother had built. It was incredible to see how her grandchildren had taken the lessons she had taught them and made them their own, using their skills and resources to amplify the changes they wanted to see in the world. Her sons, too, were continuing to use their positions of power and influence for good. They had each started new initiatives, furthering their mother's vision of a world where success wasn't defined by wealth or status, but by how much you could give back to others. Their success was now measured not in personal achievement, but in the tangible, positive change they were creating in the world. Her eldest son, the CEO, had begun a project focused on reducing the environmental impact of his company, pushing for innovation in sustainable technology and advocating for businesses to be held accountable for their environmental footprint. Her middle son, the space scientist, had worked on several outreach programs to inspire underrepresented students to pursue careers in space exploration, teaching them that the stars weren't out of reach for anyone, no matter their background. And her youngest son, the fund manager, had created a financial literacy program that aimed to equip individuals from marginalized communities with the skills and knowledge to manage their finances and invest in their futures. Through their efforts, the world was changing, and her influence was still deeply felt. The impact of her journey, her story, and the lessons she had shared with the world were being carried on by the very people she had raised, and by those who had been inspired by them. But even as her family continued to grow and thrive, she knew that the most important lesson she could leave behind wasn't one of grand accomplishments or accolades. It was one of love. The love she had shown to her children, to her community, and to those who needed it most had been the foundation of everything she had built. And that love had been the driving force behind every decision she made, every project she started, and every life she touched. In her final days, as her health began to decline, she felt at peace. She had lived a life that was full, meaningful, and rich with purpose. Her story had come full circle, from a young woman struggling to survive in a world that had tried to reject her, to a mother, leader, and changemaker who had left an indelible mark on the world. She had not just survived, she had thrived, and in doing so, she had created a future for those who came after her. Surrounded by her family, in the warmth of their presence, she knew that her legacy would continue for generations to come. Her sons, her grandchildren, the women she had mentored, and the communities she had helped, all would carry forward the lessons of love, resilience, and the power of self-belief. And as she closed her eyes one last time, she whispered to herself the words she had lived by all these years. The world is not shaped by the people who give up, but by the people who keep going. And I kept going. Her passing, though expected, left a void that was felt deeply by her family, friends, and the countless individuals whose lives she had touched. The world had lost a remarkable woman, but her legacy, the lessons she had imparted, the strength she had shown, and the lives she had helped to change, was far from gone. Her funeral was not just a gathering of mourners. It was a celebration of a life well lived. Those who attended spoke of the incredible woman she had been. A woman who had never given up, who had fought for what was right, and who had spent her life making the world a better place. The church was filled with people from all walks of life. Women she had mentored, children she had helped, colleagues who had worked alongside her, and family members who had seen her rise from a young woman full of hope to a global force of change. Her sons stood together, each of them with tears in their eyes, but each filled with pride for the mother who had given them everything they needed to succeed. Not just in business or in life, but in creating a world that was more compassionate, more inclusive, and more focused on lifting others up. Her eldest son, the tech CEO, spoke at the service, his voice steady but emotional. "We are who we are because of her," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years of lessons learned. "She taught us that success is not defined by what you have or what others think of you. It's defined by what you give, by how you lift others, and by how you live your truth. Our mother never sought recognition, but she changed the world. And she did it with love, kindness, and an unbreakable spirit." Her middle son, the space scientist, shared how his mother had encouraged him to dream big, to reach for the stars, and to never be discouraged by the people who told him his dreams were too impossible. "She showed me that no dream is too big, and that no obstacle is too great to overcome," he said. "She was our rock, and her legacy will continue to inspire us as we reach for the stars." both literally and figuratively. Her youngest son, the fund manager, spoke of his mother's unwavering belief in the importance of financial independence and responsibility. She taught me that money isn't the goal, making a difference is. She always believed that the greatest wealth is in how much you can help others, and I will carry that lesson with me always. Her grandchildren, too, stood as a testament to the life she had lived. They spoke of the way she had taught them the importance of compassion and hard work, of perseverance and courage. Her oldest granddaughter, who had taken up the mantle of water advocacy, shared how her grandmother had been her role model. She taught me that no matter how small I may seem, I have the power to create change, she said, her voice filled with gratitude and love. I will honor her by continuing her work and making sure that her light never fades. As the ceremony ended and the attendees began to leave, her family remained behind for a quiet moment of reflection. They had lost a mother, a grandmother, a mentor, and a friend, but they had gained so much more. The lessons she had passed down, the values she had instilled, and the love she had given would continue to guide them, not just in their personal lives, but in everything they did. Her sons had always admired her strength, but now, as they looked around at the work that was continuing in her name, they realized that her strength had been the foundation of all their success. And it was that foundation that would carry them forward, just as it had carried her through the darkest of times. In the years to come, her foundation, her advocacy work, and her impact would continue to thrive. The women she had mentored would rise to leadership positions, and the communities she had helped would continue to grow and flourish. Her story would be told over and over again, not just as the story of one woman who overcame adversity, but as the story of a global movement that was built on love, kindness, and the belief that we all have the power to create change. Her family would continue to honor her legacy, not just through their words, but through their actions. They would ensure that the world she had worked so hard to build, a world of opportunity, compassion, and equality, would continue to thrive long after she was gone. And as time passed, her name would live on, not in the titles or accolades she had accumulated, but in the lives she had touched, the hearts she had opened, and the world she had changed. Her legacy would endure, an eternal flame that would continue to inspire generations to come. For she had lived a life that had proven the most important lesson of all, that no matter where you start, no matter what you face, you have the power to rise, to succeed, and to make a difference. And in the end, that is all that really matters.